Last year I said that it was just a matter of time before someone built an Autoflex shaft at half the cost, and this might be it. What's happening? Panda Nation, Peter Von Panda in my hand. I am holding the magical, mystical Autoflex here, the Pink Panther of golf shafts, probably the most visible of any golf shaft I've ever owned, with this hot pink, and then it kind of fades into this black metallic green down here. And this very flexible whippy golf shaft is amazing. Does it add 15 yards to your game, your drives? Yes, for sure. I proved it. I used a few different versions of it. This is the one that I have built here for my Cobra LTDX driver. I love it. It's a great shaft. I don't always play it, but one of the things that I said about this is that it is very expensive, and it's just a matter of time before someone takes this apart and constructs their own shaft, and probably at a fraction of the cost. Now, I will also say here that a lot of the magic is just how stable this golf shaft is and how flexible it is. So, very flexible, but yet I don't think it has a lot of twist or torque to it, and that is what makes this so dangerous out on the golf course. Now, the problem with the Autoflex shaft is that it is brutally expensive. $800+ to put yourself in one, and as I took a look at it the first time and I actually cut it open, I couldn't really find anything that seemed all that unique about it. Now, I'm not an expert in graphite shaft construction or anything, but there didn't seem to be any special weave or materials or anything like that. Now, this shaft is brand new to the market, and I think it wants to be heralded as something amazing because it says Brava! 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 And if you play that and you are tempted to say Brava, then I think the shaft is doing what it says it's going to do. Now, the first thing I want to show you here is this is totally naked shaft, and it says it is using some exotic materials. Carbon fiber, I believe, is really the key component. It is very light and is very thin, and be careful when you clamp this down. I will say that doesn't go for just this shaft. I've put graphite shafts in the vise before, and to get the grip on, you had to really kind of crank it down, and some of those have broken, so this is not unlike that. Now, I will say that there seem to be some pretty obvious differences between this and the Autoflex, and I want to tell you what I am seeing is different, and it kind of gives me pause about whether this thing can actually be as good as the Autoflex, even though the company that makes this is known for innovations in shaft technology, and they say that in their testing, this shaft is actually longer. So, this golf shaft here is actually made by this company, BGT, Breakthrough Golf Technologies, and you know BGT here on the channel because I use them in my putters. They make incredibly stiff yet soft feeling putter shafts, and I love them. I won't go back. Maybe if someone else makes something competitive to it, yeah, I'd use that, but I won't use a standard even metal putter shaft. They just don't have the same stiffness that the BGT shafts have. So it gives me some confidence here that a trusted name in shaft technology knows what they're doing here. And what you might be able to see here is that it says Speedflite NRG. So they're saying there's a lot of energy transfer between this shaft and the golf ball. Now, this one is the stiff here, and that might be a little funny, but I actually swing the driver at about 90 to 93 miles an hour. This is supposed to be used for 95 mile per hour swing speed, so I kind of figured that was pretty close. Now, I will also say they have two flexes down, a regular, which was for 80-ish mile per hour, and then a light or a flexible, which was below that. So I wanted something that was a little future-proof. I've been working on my swing speed, in fact, using some weights and one of those hitting bags to try to get that up. But I will tell you that there are differences that I can see from that Autoflex shaft right out of the gate. First of all, it's beautiful. It's got like this copper and silver look to it. It actually looks much nicer. And in fact, I usually put a decal over the pink part of the Autoflex shaft because it's just not my style. But this is actually a beautiful looking shaft here. Kind of black up here. Now, this is not just graphite. I think it's carbon fiber. It actually seems very light. It actually says right here 54 grams. I actually weighed this a moment ago, and it's 57 grams totally uncut. Longer here, so you probably are going to trim it anyway, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually a little less than 54 grams when you get done with it. The other thing I will say is that the material doesn't seem to be the same as the Autoflex, so this does not seem like a standard copy to me. In fact, this shaft and the Autoflex shaft are very similar at this end because the walls here are very thin. However, I noticed on the Autoflex that the inner hole here is much, much smaller, so what they have is a lot of material down here on the end end of the Autoflex, and this seems very standard to me. It actually has a pretty big hole right there, and you can see all the way through. Now, the other thing I want to show you here is if you look through that little hole on the end of the shaft there, you can see daylight through the shaft. Even if I hold the shaft right in the middle here, you can see the mountains through this shaft. That's important because that means this shaft is not bending. In fact, you can't do that with the Autoflex if you hold it right in the middle. It has too much sag to it because it is super flexible. I want to show you here that even with the full length of this shaft, let me do it like this because this is the only part that really is supposed to flex much. And you can see I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on there, and it's bending, but it's not flexing a lot. In contrast, let me take the Autoflex shaft here and do the same thing, and that is pretty obvious how much it bends, right? I'm not trying to overflex it or anything, but this seems stiffer, and I feel like part of the magic of the Autoflex is how flexible it is, right? So that seems strange to me that this wouldn't have the same flex. You know, I would think the formula would be a lot of flex and a very low torque. But somehow BGT in their testing has said this Brava is as long, nay longer, than the Autoflex with about the same dispersion. So I'm really excited about trying this out. Now I want to show you here that we are going to give this thing a thorough workout. I have my airspeeder shaft here. This goes in my Cobra LTD-X, and this is a regular flex shaft, and it's 40 grams, so it's actually very light. A lot of people have said, well, the Autoflex's trick is that it's just super light, so you get more club head speed. Well, the Autoflex, I think in this configuration, is something like 48 grams or something like that, so it's actually heavier than my gamer shaft, and this one, being 54 grams, is heavier than my gamer shaft by about 14 grams. So both of these shafts are heavier. So I'm going to go ahead and build this shaft to the same specs that I have the other shafts here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hit all of these enough times to get a good sample. That's probably going to be like 30 hits with each, which means I'm going to be extremely exhausted. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit them in reverse order. So I'm actually going to start with the Brava, then go to the Autoflex, and then go to the airspeeder. And the reason I'm going to do that is I feel like a lot of people use their gamer shafts first, use those, they get warmed up, they're feeling good, they got their timing down, and then they go to the other shafts, and it's a little bit of a false test because you're warmed up and maybe ready to hit new shafts even harder. So I'm going to start with this one, go to this one, and then end on this one, and hopefully that gives the airspeeder here the best chance of outperforming these two juggernauts. I'm going to go to the simulator with the Foresight GC2, and we're going to get some distance. I am also going to tell you that because I am not a good enough or consistent enough golfer, below average, one might say, is that I am going to remove any of the outliers on the low side. If I duck hook it or slice it out of bounds or something like that, I'm just going to get rid of those. I want a really good representation of what my average shots with the shafts are. And then I'm also going to strip out the outliers to the top because I really am curious to see if you really connect with it, if you really get everything out of each of these shafts, how far can you actually hit it? Because even though maybe that average over a long period of time is pretty similar, you know, is one shaft 5, 10, 15 yards farther than the other? That would be pretty compelling for a lot of people. So let's get it built and get it tested. All right, so here we go. I'm gonna try the airspeeder, Autoflex, and Brava right here. Let's see what they do. All right, so I have been playing around with this Brava shaft here, and I guess one of the things that I will say off the bat here is that shaft technology confuses me. I am definitely not as familiar with how all of the things work. So it's confusing because I have been playing this shaft for the last couple of days pretty extensively. I actually spent a decent amount of time at the simulator yesterday and had some surprising results. And so I went back and I spent more time today to see if I could validate them. Now, here's what I want to say. I know that the Autoflex shaft works. I played it. I have tested it extensively in different clubs and even their different flexes. So when the Autoflex performs better than my stock shaft, in terms of distance at least, that doesn't surprise me, but it's very flexible. And I didn't see that flexibility. I didn't really see a carbon copy of the Autoflex in the Brava shaft, so I really didn't know what to expect. And on one hand, I hope it's longer, but on the other hand, I don't really believe it's going to be longer. And does it even have to be? Can it be as good as the Autoflex and no longer? And that's fine too, because obviously it's more affordable. But after playing it the last couple days, I want to show you the data. And then I want to explain why I think it's working, and then my overall thoughts on how this fits in, or for the average golfer, the pros and cons of something like this over your standard shaft or the Autoflex. All right, so let me just show you the data here. So I spent a lot of time. I'm not going to represent every hit that I had. One of the things that I will tell you is that I did an episode about this on my podcast, but for whatever reason, the Foresight GC2 drive data does not seem to jive with what I'm getting in real life. From what I've understood from message boards and stuff, that the way they have it set up and then the way the T raises the ball, that the GC2 being a little lower than the hitting surface and then putting it on the T kind of screws with this. But I will say directionally, and when I compare different clubs or shafts, it all seems right. But on the course, I can tell you reliably, simulator data is not what I'm seeing in real life, and I can get into that more in another video. But directionally, it works. What I have to do is some compensation on the numbers that I get from the simulator to translate it into real life. And basically, I add yardage to know what I'm going to expect in real life. All right. So the airspeeder shaft here, I actually was hitting this, and I was hitting it right about what I expected, or at least what I expected to see in the simulator. And so I actually didn't need to hit this that much. This is the shaft that I play most often. Probably more than 50% of the time, this is the shaft I'm taking out on the course. And I can get into a longer video about why I'm playing this more often than the Autoflex. To me, it's just more consistent. And when me as an amateur golfer have timing problems, I think the Autoflex tends to exacerbate those problems, and a slightly less flexible shaft, even though it's shorter, tends to be a little more forgiving when you have those timing issues. So obviously if you shorten it up and you're off 10 degrees, you're just not going to be as far out of play as you would be with a shorter shaft. Anyway, but this is what I'm getting, and this was very much what I expected. It's very consistent. I can play the shaft very well. In real life, I will tell you that I'm averaging over the last 18 months with this 232 yards in the real world. So as you can see here, the average is probably around 205 here. So it's short. It's 25 yards short. But it's pretty consistent. And as you can see, I'm pushing everything to the left just a little bit. It's actually partially by design. I actually like playing it that way. What you can see here is pretty consistent, pretty good. I'm happy with this. It's a playable shot for me. I would certainly like more distance. Now, here are the samples from the Autoflex, and this is exactly what I expect in real life here. So to me, a lot of people talk about how consistent the Autoflex shaft is, and it is if you are consistent on your swing timing. So my issue is sometimes I have a little tendency to cast, sometimes I drag that club, which kind of pushes shots right for me. Sometimes I just get it bang on and it really cruises. But a lot of times, if I am struggling at all with the timing, the Autoflex shaft to me tends to spray a little bit more. And this is what you can see here. In fact, you can see that the Autoflex shaft is longer, but my dispersion is wider, which is totally what I expect. And if I were to keep hitting this, I would expect there to be more data points on the left and right side. It just would be a wider spray pattern and longer. And the problem with this is that if I add, in this case, probably 15 yards to my airspeeder shaft, and I add 10 more yards to the left or right side, that's in the rough as opposed to potentially in the fairway. You can see here that my longest shots with the airspeeder were basically the same as my shortest shots with the Autoflex. So the Autoflex basically puts me at the outer range of what the airspeeder can do. This is pretty consistent to what I expect with the Autoflex and the airspeeder. Now, I hit a lot of shots with the BGT Brava shaft because I was not sure what I was seeing was right. And in fact, I hit a ton over 2 days. So what I wanted to do here is show you the reasonable sampling that I got. But what you can see here, to me, is that they are falling right where the Autoflex is falling. And some of those, when you really get a hold of it, are quite a bit longer. So you can see my longest Autoflex shot was about 219, call it. I think I'd have to look at the data, but my longest Brava shot was 233. So 219 to 233, you're talking another 12, 13, 14 yards, which is crazy. And that's what was really striking me. And so that's why I went back today again, because I did hit them in reverse order. And so I went to the simulator again today, rotated the shafts around, and this was basically the same thing I got. Now, I will also say I was not playing with the loft. So I basically played them all at the same loft, which for me was about 10.5 degrees. And I didn't want to necessarily futz with that because I think I really care more about ball speed coming off the face. That's really what's going to determine what loft you want to play at and your launch angle and all of that. I would say that generally the launch angles were pretty good for all of these. What I will say here is that the Brava basically is an Autoflex shaft. It performed basically the same as an Autoflex shaft. You might be saying, Pete, why are you so stunned? It's designed to try to be longer than your standard shaft. I wanted to show this to you because I want to get into the averages as well as I mentioned the outliers here, the shots that you can reach out when you really try. What's the farthest shots you can get? Because I think that's relevant too. So I bring this up because the Autoflex shaft is very whippy. And I get that somehow they're controlling the torque. So they're making it very whippy, like an A-flex or a ladies flex, something like that. But somehow they're controlling all of these noodly characteristics to create a consistent shaft. Now, if your timing is bang on, you can just keep plopping these things out in the middle. Like Matt Blois can do that. It's great. And better golfers will just pick up distance because the swing is more consistent. But for me, it's a dispersion issue, mostly because of how whippy that tip is. When people have talked about it, if you have not held an Autoflex shaft in your hand and kind of done the waggle test with it, it's hard to explain because it feels so noodly. Now, that's really my big problem with it is because it's so noodly, I just don't like the feel. It makes me feel like I can't do my full swing, like I have to control it. Now, it actually could be good, I think, from a training and a playing perspective where you are just being more consistent and smoother through your swing. But that's why generally I play the airspeeder unless I really want to try to get distance. I'm going to a place that doesn't have a lot of hazards. It's wide open, not a lot of trees. Then absolutely, I put the Autoflex in and I play that and I try to drop some bombs. But what surprises me about the Brava is that it didn't seem as flexible. You saw when I tested it the first time, it didn't seem as flexible. However, when I put it in my driver and I did the waggle test, it definitely seems like it is whippier than I expected, especially just trying to bend it with my hand. Now, I think that whippiness is really controlled down near the tip because it does not feel noodly like the Autoflex in any way. It feels much more standard with maybe just a little bit more wiggle down on the tip, down on that 1/3. Now, one of the reasons this might be is there seems to be in the middle of the shaft, and I'm just guessing here, but you can feel it. If you run your hand up and down the shaft, what you can feel is in the middle, there are like these extra ribs. It almost feels like a very thin decal and then like paint applied over it because they're not separate. And I think it's some way that they wound it. So to me, it seems like maybe they put some reinforcement in the middle to take out some of that flex. I'm just guessing. I have no idea. BGT did not tell me anything about the technology other than what I saw on their website. And so maybe that's concentrating that movement closer down on the tip. It reminds me in some ways, without being as obvious, as the bubble shafts when they had like a bubble in the middle, the graphite shaft blew out, and that was to make that area a little stronger and stiffer, I thought. But to me, the Brava shaft, even though it's a little heavier, so I would have expected maybe my swing speed, the club head speed, and the ball speed even to maybe fall off a little bit compared to my airspeeder, 40 grams versus 54 grams, so 14 grams more. I mean, that it's in the shaft, but it will still affect the swing weight. That didn't seem to be a problem, obviously, because of how far they flew. But what I really liked about it is, even with that whippiness down on the toe near the club head, it felt like a normal shaft. So my issue with the Autoflex is that it doesn't feel like a normal shaft. But the Brava feels like a normal shaft, except you get Autoflex-like performance out of it. That's what I just don't get. And I'm not sure how they're doing it, and somehow they're controlling it. And I know that there's 4 or 5 degrees of torque, I think, in the shaft, which is actually a lot. Usually when I'm looking at the torque specs, I'm looking for very little on drivers because I know that I have this timing problem. And so what I don't want is a shaft that will twist and maybe have that face really open and exacerbate my timing issue with an open face or a closed face. So that's what I don't get, because you can see how tight this dispersion is. I would say the dispersion here is as tight as the airspeeder, just with all of the shots being as far as my longest shots with the airspeeder, and the longest shots being 235. For all intents and purposes, I really only expect Autoflex performance out of the Brava, which is what I'm getting with tighter dispersion and a shaft that feels like a regular shaft. That's what's crazy to me. But as it stands right now, their stiff shaft is fantastic. It feels to me like a regular shaft. It's giving me Autoflex performance. Those two things are alone worth it. If this Brava shaft performed as well as my Airspeeder shaft, I would have used either one of them interchangeably because they feel about the same. Even though the Brava is a little heavier, I don't swing the Brava shaft and feel like it is really flexing. I feel that in the Autoflex. I feel comfortable because it just feels like a regular shaft. It doesn't feel like a training shaft or the lag golf training whippy shafts or anything like that. And yet, I'm just getting 20 more yards with it, 15 more yards. I'm not sure what to expect in the real world fully on this, but it's going in the bag. Now, the best part about this, and like I said at the very beginning part of my video, the Brava shaft is not, in my opinion, a duplication of the Autoflex technology. It's something else that performs about the same as the Autoflex, but they are doing it at literally half the price of the Autoflex. So I think the Brava shaft, while not giving them away by any means, is a $399 shaft, which actually puts it in the category of a lot of other premium shafts. So you look at any of the really premium shafts out there from Ventus or whoever, you're talking $300 or $400 a shaft. So I think that this puts it where a lot of other shafts would be, and a lot of people would be shopping for shafts. To me, the Autoflex shaft at $700 or $800 in that range is twice as much, and it doesn't have the full potential that the Brava does. It doesn't have as much potential. It performs the same generally. The Brava has this kind of top end, this ceiling that the Autoflex doesn't have. And so it's Autoflex performance at half the price, competitive with what other shafts are, and I love it. I love it. It is my gamer shaft right now. The question is, will that continue? And I will continue to play it and find out. But I was averaging drives of 241 today. Now it's a little wet and a little steamier than normal, but that is definitely longer than my Airspeeder average of 232. So it is absolutely working for me in the real world. I'm confused, delighted, and so far I love it. And it's far more affordable for the average person. So if you want to pick up the Brava shaft, if you want to pick up the Autoflex shaft, you can do that too. The Airspeeder is a great shaft. It's my fitted shaft. It's the one that is supposed to be matched to everything that I do. But I think all these shafts are great. But obviously, if you have to pick one, there's no question. I'd be playing the Brava. So I am super stoked about it. I would love to reach out to Breakthrough Golf Technologies, maybe find out more. Maybe they would spill the beans on why this is doing what it's doing. But for right now, if you have been thinking, man, I would like a little extra distance, I'm using top of the line clubs, I've got the best driver head out there right now, I'm tapped out, and I'm looking for an easy plug and play solution to add 10 more yards to my drives, this sucker seems to do it. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Technology that works. If you want any of this, links are in the description below. Peter Von Panda. Out.
We can discover more and explore so much deeper.